All right, so hi folks, we're going to move on to another shape in our monochromatic still life. And the first time around, what I had done was I had shown you how to do things that have harder edges on them. So the idea of a cube, a rectangle, or a pyramid. So now we're going to move on to the ones that require a little bit more blending, a little bit more patience, I'll say, with them. So we're going to do the cone in this section. And the cone, and I told people this when we drew these because our still life is made up of three separate shapes that we're now painting to give them the illusion that they are a form. Um, it's basically just a triangle with a smiley face. And that would be how to draw it. So we have our shadow already painted in here, and we're doing that as the underpainting. So that was a step that we did before. So just like we did before, and I said this when we were talking in class, was the first step is still the first step, okay? So I've got what I'm hoping is going to be my pure color already mixed here, knowing, of course, that I'm going to have to add to it. And so we have got our cup of water, my favorite brush, and we're ready to work on this. So step number one is going to be to take your pure color and paint it right on top of everything. So you're going to go ahead and repaint the shape. And what I normally do is make sure that I'm using a decent amount of water to kind of thin the paint out a little bit. I'm not a big fan of thick, gooey paint. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to my brush and see if I can just thin this out a little bit. Because what I want you to notice is that the difference between what was just painted with the regular color and now that I'm painting right on top of that underpainting that we did where the shadow is, it's showing the darkness through. I mean, that's the whole point. That's why we underpaint where shadows are going to be. Okay? So we want to make sure we're being very careful, okay? We don't want to just sort of be super sloppy about putting this down. And I know that for some of these, it gets a little bit challenging only because these two things are the same color. And now we want to define the difference between what is the bottom of the shape and where the shadow goes. So that's what we want to make sure we're being very careful about. So this is just our first step. And remember, we had painted our bottom down here with a tint. So when we do this first step, you've just got to be a little bit careful because there sometimes, depending on how the paint comes out, it might look a little bit similar as far as the coloring. So these two guys next to each other might be a little bit close. It's okay. You just want to just keep your eye on it. So I'm going to come over here and try to find the edge of my cone. Will be my first step here. Just so I know where I'm starting and stopping. And every once in a while, you got to step back a little bit, get away from it, and look and make sure that looks straight, okay? I'm going to go back to water, and I am barely putting my brush in the water. I'm not like dipping all the way down in it and getting a big giant swath of water or a wet drippy brush. Just enough water to move the paint around. And I know a couple of folks in class had also said they had a couple of the same issues that I had. One was with the black paint, and the other one, like, it was leaving streaky stuff, and then the issue of our paint feeling like it was a little bit sticky. Okay. So at this point, I'm interested more in spreading out the paint that I have with the water than putting a really thick coat on. And if you're monochromatic, if you chose either blue or purple, most likely your shadow, your underpainting is very, very dark. And if that's the case, when you go to put your pure color, your purple or your blue, with nothing mixed into it right on here, it's probably going to look really good. So, because what you end up doing is sort of tinting the way that the shadow is. And then that part, you know, so now it looks like just a dark blue shadow. So we can see that we've got our lighter side, we've got our underpainting going. And what we had found before was that because I'm using grays for this one, I'm having to do a little bit more paint mixing. You probably won't have to. Now, the only thing, excuse me, the only thing that you want to make sure is if you end up with a weird line here, especially those of you guys that are doing red, because for some reason the red shows up super dark, and people are using, you know, one of these reds, and when they do that, it's hard to make it blend. So the trick is that both sides still have to be wet. Otherwise you end up with a really hard line. So since I know that I've got to make it be much, much darker, and that if we bring our circle in here a little bit, this was our underpainting color. I'm going to go ahead and make a darker gray to sort of help me out and get my shadow back. But again, I don't want to be black because there's not a lot of things that we see that would really be black. They really wouldn't be like that. So I'm going to add in some darker gray onto what's already on here. Now, what I just put down is lighter, so that's going to make this lighter. Just because I mixed dark here, I'm putting it on something that's wet and lighter, so I might have to adjust it again. And again, I'm being super careful on my edge here. So when I take a look at that, and my opinion of that as a shadow, I think it's still too light. So I'm going to grab some more black and make a much darker gray. I want to be, you know, closer to like this color, whereas what I have right now is this one. So I think I want to be darker over here. And like we always tell everybody, go slow when you're making anything mixed with black paint, because the black will kind of take over. And we just don't want stuff to be super, super dark. We can build it up and make it darker, but we don't want to start with it too dark. All right, so let's see how we are color-wise now. Yeah, I think that's gonna be a better color. Especially for this far edge. And that's why I said, when you go to do these shapes, this is the part that is a lot more challenging, because now, because the cone has got that rounded bottom, we've got to blend to get this to go from dark to light. Okay, so all I'm going to do is worry about right now is I'm going to put back my dark on this side over here, because my pure color with the gray, yeah, it was a little bit deep. You guys, blue, purples, you'll probably, when you put pure color on top, you'll be like, that looks awesome. That would be my expectation. All right, so all I'm going to do is just put that color back up here. Now, notice how close I am to the color that I used on the top. So my background color on the top and this color are super duper close. So again, like we did with the rectangle, I will show you how we'll make sure that we can see the difference between those two. Because sometimes when you're doing stuff like this, you have to fake it a little bit and put in some stuff that maybe visually we don't see, but it's how we make things stand out better, okay? So now this right-hand third has got its shadow back, but the other thing that you might want to do is come here and have a little bit of this dark start to curve around here at the bottom, which is what I had for my underpainting before. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do, this paint is still mildly wet, is I'm going to wipe my brush off. And most of the time the way that I do that is I just paint on a paper towel like this just to get extra paint off. And then I'm going to go back to this kind of color that I hoped was going to be my middle color. Okay. Because now I need to blend these two guys together. So I first have to put some of that paint on everywhere where that line is kind of hard. And then I'm going to keep going with it. I'm going to come further out here with it. And what you'll find is as you go back and forth, some of the dark will end up over here on the light side. Some of the light will end up over here. It's totally expected and okay. But we don't want that line to look like a dark, crazy line. And I dropped my brush right there, so I've got to pick up that paint. And I'll go back and fix that in a little while. Okay, so again, I've got a lot of paint here right now. So I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then we're going to dry brush this edge. So right now I'm bringing the dark this way. We're going this way with it, toward the light, to try to soften up that edge. Okay. Then I'm gonna wipe my brush off again. And now I'm going to go way over here to where I was a little bit wide and see if I can blend this into the dark stuff over here. So basically anywhere that I use that white or that lighter gray, I just want to come over here and soften it up so where it's dark, it's now a little bit more blended, like it looks a little bit more even, okay? And this is, yeah, this in the camera right here was reading as a light spot, but it's a reflection. Okay, so I have no more paint on my brush. All I'm doing is taking what I have and trying to soften the way that this looks. Okay. Now, I did get a little crazy. I've got some dark stuff going on here. I'm going to wipe my brush off again. So again, I'm just painting with it on the paper towel to get rid of the extra stuff. And I'm going to go back to this kind of middle color that I made. I'm going to go here with that. And this is significantly lighter. So I'm going to kind of keep pulling it over here toward the edge because to me that's what I think it should look like when light hits it. So I'm going to neaten up my edge here. It's kind of like I asked somebody in class, I was watching them paint, and they like to outline things first and then go in and kind of paint the middle part. So I was asking about how they did stuff. So like, especially if they ever had to mow the lawn, when they mowed their lawn, did they always do all the trimming first and then go back and do the big parts, or the reverse? Do you do the big parts and you get as close to the edges as you can and then go back in and trim whatever's left over? So to me, painting is almost the same idea. Is, do you do the big parts? Do you do the middle big parts first and then clean up your edges? Or do you do your edges first so that you know where to start and stop, and then come in and do the middle? I'm not saying that either is right or wrong or better. One is better than the other. It's just kind of what you're comfortable with. Okay? So what we've done now is we put a lighter color back in. We know that this side is going to stay white or lighter. So we're going to leave that light gray there. But now I have a little bit of a funky line over here again that looks really dramatic. Okay, so I'm going to wipe my brush off again. And I'm going to see if I start over here on the dark and pull it toward the light, if I can soften up. And again, I'm not using any more paint. All I'm doing is taking the dark paint that's already kind of hanging out there and seeing if I can pull that now back toward the light. So see how we have to keep going back and forth and back and forth. I'm just going to see if we can soften up that line a little bit. Okay. So that's not coming out too bad. That looks pretty good. So I'm moving the light part around again. So in my opinion, this down here looks a little funky. So I'm going to come in with a little bit, just a tiny bit of dark paint, and just sort of neaten up this edge again. Just so it looks a little bit darker. But before I mess with it anymore, I'm going to wipe the brush off and then take that tiny amount that's there and pull it into where the light stuff is. And again, just trying to soften up that line so that things look more rounded. Now, the one thing I don't like is how this weird little spot kind of looks weird and dark. So I am going to put some more paint on my brush and add that to it. So at this point, we can do one of two things. We can really significantly lighten up this edge so there's a difference between the two of these guys. So honestly, I think that's my choice. So I'm going to go back to that first color that I've got and bring that right up to the edge here. So I'm just going to kind of define that edge a little bit more. Okay. Then definitely wipe my brush off that has that light paint on it. And then I'm going to come in here and just soften what I just put there so it blends in a little bit better. Okay. So we have that look to it. And I'll hold that down so you can see the dark part on it. Now, a couple more things we've got to do. The first thing is, well, I dropped my paintbrush over here, so that I made a mess of myself. So I'm actually going to rinse my brush off in the water because it's got too much white in it. And then I'm going to dry it. I'm going to kind of not start over, but I'm just going to start with a brush that doesn't have a lot of white in it. And I want to do something with this shadow. So I'm going to take black and I'm going to put that right here on the edge. I'll show you what I'm going to do. And I'm going to be super careful. So I'm going to go right along the edge of where the cone would be. because I want the two things to kind of show differently from each other. But again, I don't want to just leave, you know, like a weird black shadow there because that's going to look bizarre. Okay. So now I definitely have a line between the two, and I'm using the flat side of the brush to come around and define the shape of this. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that dark color that I made to fade this out. So I'm going to add some of that dark paint in on top of the black. Just a little bit. Because I messed up the shadow over here, but when I drop my paintbrush. And if I mix the two of them together a little bit, it's not totally black, it's just a really, really dark gray. Okay, so we're just being really, really careful about this. So again, I'm going to try to drag this out. I can see where it's a little bit, it shows a little bit, so I'm going to go water. No more paint, just water to come in here and then try to blend this. If your brush is too wet, wipe it off, make it dry again. And then come in here and drag it. But like I said, my shadow just wasn't standing out enough. It looked kind of funky. Okay. So again, I'm just sort of I made a darker gray to sit right there. Now I'm just letting it hang out a little bit. Okay. Now my other problem is over here on this side. These two colors are nearly exactly the same. So we're going to add fake background to it. Almost exactly like we just did to this shadow down here. So again, I'm going to start with black. And the only reason, because I'm using this flat brush, I can kind of go up against the edge and fix things. The round brushes aren't my favorite because it's harder to... it's harder to keep a straight line. They kind of get, they kind of flatten out and they kind of get fat. So I'm going with black and I'm going to go right up against the cone. And again, not a lot. Just because I wanted this to be darker. And again, I'm using a tiny amount of black paint. I'm not using any huge amount. Okay. So I'm definitely making sure that I'm defining the edge on this with a very small amount of black paint. I'm going to go all the way up to the top of the cone. Okay. And then just like I did before, because, right, that would look really strange, I'm going to take the gray, just like I did in the bottom where the shadow is at the bottom, and add that to it to try to get it to kind of fade out into nothing. So I'm going to put the gray down first, all the way along the edge of the black. Okay. And then we're going to wipe our brush off. And now I'm going to start back here where the black is and try to pull that into the gray. And it's started to dry out a little bit, so I'm going to have to go this way to kind of get it to move a bit. So, you know, you might think, well, isn't that kind of like outlining it? Yeah, kind of, but not super duper crazy. I'm going to go to water to try to fade this out a little bit more. Okay, so like I said, I've sort of created this area over here that is a little bit darker, and it's fake. It's fake darkness because that really isn't happening in the picture. And use a little bit more paint. Okay, because again, we don't want this to stand out and be super obvious. So I put a little bit more of the gray down. Now I'm going to use water so that this will kind of blend into the background. So I definitely want to make sure that I'm putting everything like, oh, I'm going away, away, away from everything. Okay. So now, and again, I know that right now it's wet, so it reads shiny on the camera. And the other thing that I noticed that I did was I was sloppy over here when I painted this, so I'm going to fix that too. So I'm going to make sure that I go right up to the edge of the cone on this side and neaten that up a bit. Basically, I just left parts of it that just for some reason, didn't get any paint on them. And have that kind of, again, fade out. But I don't want to just leave this abrupt. See how it just abruptly ends? So I'm going to take my brush, water only, and just see if we can kind of get that to fade away. And also, your stuff should look crisp once it gets down here to the edge. You know, you shouldn't have like a weird, because this line should be nice and straight. And when it intersects with this, it should be nice and straight. There shouldn't be like a weird like dip in it or anything. It should be like one continuous line. Okay. So if you still see areas that don't look blended, like I said, my solution on this is going to be water on my brush, and I'm just going to sort of go over this area over here that went to gray, because what I'd like it to do is to just sort of fade out and not show as a second color, because we had that same issue on the other side where we kind of repainted what was next to it, like we did it down here and up there so that it stood out better. That's going to be your choice. If you realize later on that really you think the whole background, you just don't like the way it's matching, so you want to repaint it all so that the colors match better, that is absolutely your choice. If when you look at it, it just bothers you, especially down here at the bottom, because remember when we were way over here and we did the rectangle, I repainted a bunch of the stuff here. I mean, so far, it doesn't look, you know, as it moves across, it doesn't look bad, what I painted over here, so I'm not gonna lose sleep about it just yet. Okay, but I am gonna keep blending this background, again, with just water, so I can get the new paint color, which is slightly darker than what was there, to just have really, really soft edges, so it just sort of fades off into nothing. Okay, and I know from when I look down at the camera, what I can see is it looks weird, but it's also wet right now, so it still looks a little bit dramatic because this whole area is wet. So I'm gonna have to take a look at it when it dries, and just make sure all these edges are nice and soft. But I think doing that, is much better. Okay, so that's an idea for how to deal with your cone that's on here. we'll move on to some more rounded shapes that need blending. Push that down so the light gets off of it. There we go. All right. So this will be video number 2 when you go to take a look. All right. And of course, you got to let me know if there's things that are giving you a moment of pause, like you just can't figure it out. You got to let me know, okay? All right, guys. Thank you.